right, move it lively now.
Look at that, real ice cream. I can't believe it.
July 1944. The Pacific air hangs thick with salt and heat. Steel decks shimmer under the sun as American sailors stand scattered along the rail of an anchored fleet. Shirts cling to their backs. Boots rest on scorched metal. For weeks, they have lived on canned meat, powdered eggs, lukewarm water drawn from evaporators that never quite keep up. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, indifferent and vast. Then a small barge edges closer. It does not carry ammunition. It does not bring fuel. There are no guns mounted on its deck. Instead, hoses are connected. Crates are opened, and within minutes, sailors are holding metal bowls filled with something impossible in the middle of a tropical war zone. Ice cream. Cold, solid, real. Laughter ripples across the decks. For a moment, the war recedes. The heat loosens its grip. Faces soften. Some men close their eyes as the cold hits their tongues, as if trying to remember a world that existed before blackouts and casualty lists. Thousands of miles away, in Europe, German naval intelligence officers will later read reports that mention this detail in passing. Frozen desserts served at sea during wartime. They will struggle to believe it, because what floats quietly beside the American fleet that day is not just a barge. It is proof of something deeper, an approach to war that values endurance, morale, and industrial reach in ways few enemies truly understood. And that difference begins long before the first scoop is served. When the Second World War begins in September 1939, navies do not think first about comfort. They think about range, fuel, steel, and survival. Food, while essential, is treated as a fixed limitation rather than a flexible resource. Every fleet enters the war carrying assumptions inherited from the First World War. Sailors will endure hardship. Morale will come from discipline. Logistics will always lag behind combat. At sea, this reality is unforgiving. Fresh food spoils quickly. Refrigeration exists, but space aboard warships is precious, and electrical power is prioritized for propulsion, radios, radar, and weapons. Meat is salted. Bread turns hard within days. Vegetables disappear early in any deployment. After that, diets collapse into repetition. Tinned beef, hard biscuits, powdered substitutes. Warm climates make everything worse. Cold climates make storage easier, but hunger sharper. Across Europe, rationing becomes a fact of daily life. By 1940, Britain operates under strict civilian food controls. Germany follows a similar path, managing scarcity through centralized distribution. These constraints follow sailors to sea. A navy is never separate from the economy that feeds it. Nowhere is this more evident than in the German Kriegsmarine. Germany enters the war without a tradition of global naval sustainment. Its surface fleet is small. Its supply chain is built for continental war. The U-boat arm, which becomes Germany's primary naval weapon, operates under extreme conditions. Submarines are cramped, airless, and wet. Food is packed wherever space allows, beneath bunks, beside torpedoes, even inside the pressure hull's narrow passageways. Fresh bread is hung from pipes. Sausages are tied to bulkheads. Potatoes roll freely underfoot until they rot. Within days, fresh items are consumed or spoiled. What remains is canned food, often eaten cold. Water is rationed. Hygiene deteriorates. Patrols stretch from weeks into months. Morale becomes fragile. German U-boat commanders record the psychological toll in patrol reports and personal letters. Men grow irritable. Fatigue accumulates. Small discomforts amplify into resentment. There is no relief once submerged. No escape from heat, smell, or repetition. Food is not just sustenance. It becomes a marker of how far from home a sailor has traveled and how little the system can give back. Surface sailors fare little better. On raiders and destroyers, endurance is limited by fuel and supplies. Extended operations strain crews. Even victories are followed by weeks of monotonous deprivation. Other navies share similar struggles. The Royal Navy, though more experienced in global operations, is stretched thin by convoy duty and blockades. Ships operate continuously, often beyond peacetime limits. Sailors endure long watches and basic rations. Fresh food appears only when a port is reached. Comfort is secondary to persistence. This is the accepted norm of naval warfare. Hardship is expected. Suffering is endured. Morale is maintained through discipline, tradition, and the promise of victory, not through material abundance. But beneath the surface of the Atlantic and Pacific, a different philosophy is beginning to form. In the United States, before Pearl Harbor, the Navy already possesses a unique advantage: distance. American naval planners understand that future wars will not be fought close to home. Any serious conflict will require sustained operations thousands of miles from continental ports. This forces a logistical mindset that differs fundamentally from European powers. Even in the interwar years, U.S. naval doctrine emphasizes supply as a form of combat power. Fleet exercises in the 1930s repeatedly test endurance, underway replenishment, and mobile support units. The lessons are not glamorous, but they are recorded carefully. When the United States enters the war in December 1941, these ideas accelerate under pressure. The first months are chaotic. Ships deploy rapidly. Supply lines strain. Early Pacific operations are improvised. Sailors experience the same shortages as their counterparts elsewhere. Canned food dominates. Heat exhausts crews. Morale is tested. But unlike other navies, American planners do not accept this as permanent. They see morale not as a luxury, but as a variable that can be engineered. Food, in this view, is not merely fuel. It is time, endurance, psychological resilience. A crew that eats better lasts longer. A fleet that lasts longer controls more ocean. And control of the ocean decides wars. This belief does not emerge from sentimentality. It grows from industrial confidence. Because behind the American fleet stands an economy that, by 1942, is mobilizing at a scale the world has never seen. And that scale will soon transform not only how ships fight, but how they eat. That transformation begins ashore, inside offices, factories, and supply bureaus far from the sound of guns. After December 1941, the United States does not merely enter the war. It reorganizes itself around it. Factories run day and night. Shipyards expand along both coasts. Entire cities reorient their labor towards steel, engines, electronics, and logistics. By mid-1942, American industrial output surpasses that of all Axis powers combined. This is not just production. It is systemic capacity, the ability to design solutions to problems that other nations must simply endure. Within the U.S. Navy, this capacity flows through a less visible but critical institution, the Bureau of Supplies and Accounts. Long before ice cream ever reaches a ship's deck, naval supply officers are already debating how food affects combat readiness. Their reports do not read like morale pamphlets. They read like engineering documents. Caloric intake, vitamin deficiency, fatigue correlations, heat stress, psychological monotony. Everything is measured. American naval leadership accepts a premise that would have seemed unrealistic to many of their counterparts. Sailors who are physically comfortable perform better in prolonged operations. Comfort, therefore, becomes a tactical concern. This idea shapes provisioning policy. Unlike European navies constrained by blockade and scarcity, the U.S. Navy can't afford experimentation. New food preservation methods are tested. Dehydrated products are improved. Frozen storage capacity is expanded wherever electrical generation allows. Ships are modified. Support vessels are designed not only to carry fuel and ammunition, but also food that can restore a sense of normalcy. Refrigeration becomes central. Mechanical refrigeration is not new, but using it extensively at sea presents challenges. Power demands are high. Equipment must withstand vibration, humidity, and salt corrosion. Failures cannot be tolerated. Yet American industry solves these problems through redundancy and scale. Compressors improve. Insulation advances. Repair crews are trained specifically for refrigeration systems. By 1942, many large U.S. warships carry improved cold storage. Meat can be preserved longer. Butter becomes available more consistently. Even frozen vegetables appear in limited quantities. Still, this is not enough. As the war in the Pacific expands, fleets operate farther from permanent bases. Carrier task forces remain at sea for weeks. Amphibious operations require sustained presence near hostile shores. Resupply ports are often undeveloped, contested, or non-existent. The problem becomes clear. No matter how well a combat ship is equipped, it cannot carry unlimited refrigerated food. The solution emerges from an American specialty: floating support infrastructure. Just as oilers allow ships to refuel at sea, planners begin exploring whether food preparation and cold storage can be centralized. Instead of forcing every warship to dedicate space and power to luxury items, why not create specialized vessels that provide them to entire fleets? This is where the idea of floating refrigeration facilities takes shape. Initially, experiments are modest. Converted barges carry cold storage units. Some are stationed at forward anchorages. Others are towed behind fleet elements. Their mission is simple: produce and distribute frozen food to ships that would otherwise go without. Among the items considered, one stands out, not because of nutritional value, but because of psychological impact. Ice cream. Naval nutritionists understand its limitations. It is not essential. It is not efficient. It requires milk, sugar, refrigeration, and processing. By traditional wartime logic, it makes no sense. But morale officers argue otherwise. Ice cream represents something rare in war: indulgence. It is associated with home, peacetime, and civilian life. Its cold temperature provides relief in tropical heat. Its sweetness breaks monotony. A single serving can reset a sailor's emotional state in ways rations cannot. Crucially, it is also measurable. Surveys conducted aboard ships note immediate mood improvement following its distribution. Commanding officers report increased energy and cooperation after such morale boosts. These observations are taken seriously, filed, analyzed, and forwarded. The U.S. Navy does not treat morale as anecdote. It treats it as data. By late 1942 and early 1943, experimental floating ice cream plants are operating in the Pacific. They are not yet widespread. They are not yet famous. But they prove something vital: that with sufficient power, refrigeration, and supply coordination, frozen desserts can be produced at sea in combat zones. This realization is not kept secret. Sailors talk. Letters home mention it. Dock workers notice specialized equipment. Enemy intelligence, always alert to anomalies, begins to register odd details in intercepted communications and reports from neutral ports. Something unusual is happening inside the American fleet. Not just better food, not just more supplies. A philosophy is being tested, one in which war at sea does not require the abandonment of all comfort, and where industrial capacity is leveraged not only to destroy the enemy, but to sustain the human beings doing the fighting. And as these floating experiments evolve, they begin to take on a more permanent, deliberate form. Ships and barges designed specifically for one purpose: making ice cream in the middle of the ocean. From this point forward, the story is no longer just about logistics. It becomes about people, perception, and the moment when the enemy realizes what American abundance truly looks like. For the sailors standing watch on a carrier deck in the Pacific, the war is not an abstract strategy. It is heat radiating from steel. It is the smell of fuel and salt. It is the slow erosion of energy that comes from repetition and exhaustion. Human endurance becomes the invisible limit of naval power. American sailors rotate through watches that blur day and night. Sleep is fragmented. Combat erupts without warning. In tropical climates, dehydration and fatigue become constant threats. Under these conditions, small improvements matter. A better meal, a colder drink, a brief reminder of life beyond the war. When ice cream appears, it does not arrive as spectacle. It is distributed quietly, efficiently, almost routinely. Sailors line up with trays. Portions are controlled. Nothing is wasted. There is no illusion that this changes the war, but it changes the day. Veterans later recall the shock of it, not because it was luxurious, but because it existed at all. The knowledge that someone, somewhere in the supply chain, thought about morale enough to make this happen carries weight. It tells crews they are seen. That endurance is valued. Behind this human moment stands technology. Refrigeration at sea requires stable power, insulated storage, and precise temperature control. Ice cream production demands even more. Mix must be stored cold. Freezing machines must operate continuously. Water supply must be clean. Everything must function in motion. The U.S. Navy solves these problems through specialization. Rather than forcing combat ships to carry ice cream equipment, support vessels take on the role. Converted concrete barges and auxiliary ships house large freezers, mixers, and storage rooms. They anchor in protected waters near forward bases. Smaller ships shuttle frozen products to the fleet. This system scales. As operations intensify, ice cream barges become regular fixtures at key Pacific anchorages. Their presence reduces strain on individual ships. Crews know that relief exists, not everywhere, but often enough to matter. Tactically, this contributes to endurance. A fleet that can remain on station longer exerts pressure without firing a shot. Forward basing reduces transit time. Morale support reduces errors caused by fatigue. These advantages accumulate slowly, invisibly, but decisively. Enemy forces begin to notice. Japanese observers, facing severe shortages by 1943, struggled to comprehend the extent of American provisioning. German naval intelligence, analyzing Allied capabilities from afar, records anomalies in supply reports. Mentions of frozen foods, unusual energy consumption at anchorages, infrastructure that does not align with traditional wartime priorities. At first, these details seem trivial. Then they repeat. By late 1943, it becomes clear that American logistics are not merely sufficient. They are expansive. They allow indulgences that other navies cannot imagine. And that realization begins to reshape how the enemy perceives the war. Not as a contest of equal endurance, but as a struggle against an opponent whose capacity appears disturbingly without ceiling. And as this awareness spreads, it reaches the desks of senior officers, men who understand that wars are not lost only by defeats in battle, but by the gradual recognition that one side can simply outlast the other. That recognition is about to become impossible to ignore. By the middle years of the war, information travels almost as relentlessly as ships. Captured documents, intercepted radio traffic, neutral port observations. Prisoner interrogations. All of it feeds intelligence systems on both sides. Most reports focus on tonnage, armament, fuel reserves, and ship movements. But occasionally, something smaller slips through, details that reveal not just what an enemy can do, but how they live. For German naval intelligence, these details are unsettling. The Kriegsmarine's intelligence apparatus, already under strain from Allied code-breaking and air superiority, attempt to assess American naval strength from fragments. They know the United States builds ships faster than Germany can sink them. They know American fuel reserves are vast. What they do not fully grasp, until too late, is the depth of American logistical culture. Reports begin to mention unusual amenities aboard U.S. ships and at forward bases. Refrigerated storage far beyond standard requirements. Specialized supply barges. Food variety inconsistent with wartime scarcity. At first, these observations are dismissed as exaggeration or misunderstanding. Ice cream, in particular, sounds implausible. Even within Germany, such a concept feels incompatible with total war. The German Navy is accustomed to austerity. U-boat crews accept deprivation as inevitable. Comfort is considered corrosive to discipline. But the reports continue. By 1943, the war in the Pacific is no longer a series of desperate reactions. It becomes a system. American forces move westward in measured steps. Guadalcanal secured, New Guinea pressured, island chains reduced one by one. Each advance stretches supply lines farther from San Francisco, Pearl Harbor, and Australia. Each new anchorage must become not just a staging point, but a living ecosystem capable of sustaining thousands of men and hundreds of ships. This is where escalation takes its quiet, logistical form. Carrier task forces remain at sea for unprecedented lengths of time. Amphibious fleets loiter offshore for weeks. Repair ships patch hulls under fire. Hospital ships receive casualties faster than they can discharge them. The Pacific is no longer crossed, it is occupied. To support this permanence, the U.S. Navy deploys assets that no previous Navy has considered essential. Among them are ice cream ships and barges. They arrive without ceremony. Some are purpose-built auxiliaries. Others are conversions, concrete-hull barges and ships whose unusual construction frees steel for combat vessels. Their design is unglamorous. Thick insulation, large refrigeration plants, mixing rooms, storage compartments, and electrical systems powerful enough to operate continuously in tropical heat. Names like USS Basilan and USS St. Andrews appear on logs and manifests, attached to a role that seems almost surreal amid invasion planning and casualty reports. Officially classified as auxiliary vessels, their mission is clear and narrowly defined. Produce and distribute ice cream to fleet units operating in forward areas. Concrete barges, some designated under naval auxiliary classifications, anchor quietly in protected lagoons. They do not maneuver with task forces. They wait. Ships come to them, or smaller craft ferry their cargo outward. Production is industrial. Thousands of gallons are mixed, frozen, and portioned daily. Flavors are simple. Portions are regulated. Nothing is wasted. The process runs on schedules as rigid as any ammunition supply chain. And then the moment arrives. Sailors line the decks. They do not cheer. They do not shout. They wait, trays in hand, heat radiating upward from steel plates baked by the equatorial sun. Some have not tasted anything cold in months. Others barely believe what they are about to receive. Metal scoops strike frozen surfaces. Bowls are filled. Word spreads faster than any order. Ice cream at sea. For the men receiving it, the experience is intensely physical. The shock of cold, the sweetness, the way it slows chewing forces attention. Conversations pause. For a few minutes, The war recedes into background noise, still present, still deadly, but momentarily distant. Commanding officers observe the effect carefully. Fatigue softens, irritability fades. Watch as that evening pass more smoothly. These are not dramatic changes. They are subtle, cumulative, and invaluable. By late 1943 and into 1944, ice cream distribution becomes routine at major forward bases. It is written into planning assumptions. Supply officers account for it alongside fuel and fresh water. What began as experiment becomes doctrine. This is escalation of a different kind. Not escalation of firepower, but of sustainability. The United States demonstrates that it does not merely intend to reach the enemy. It intends to stay, to remain operational indefinitely, to normalize life under conditions that would have broken earlier fleets. From the outside, observers begin to understand what this means. Axis intelligence services, already alarmed by American shipbuilding rates, now confront evidence of something harder to quantify. Not just material superiority, but organizational confidence. A Navy that can allocate space, power, and manpower to morale assets in the middle of an expanding war is not fighting on the edge of exhaustion. It is fighting from depth. By the time these ice cream ships operate at full capacity, the Pacific War has reached a point of no return. The American fleet is no longer an expeditionary force. It is an occupying presence. Its supply system is not improvising. It is settling in. And for the Axis powers watching from a distance, this realization lands with quiet finality. Because a Navy that can afford to make ice cream in combat zones is a Navy that has already solved the problem of endurance. And endurance, once secured, changes everything. When the reports circulate through German naval intelligence channels, they do not arrive as dramatic revelations. They appear as footnotes, marginal observations, details that, in isolation, seem almost irrelevant. Frozen desserts, refrigeration barges, power allocation for non-essential production. Yet within the analytical culture of the Kriegsmarine, these fragments provoke unease. German naval officers are trained to think in limits. Fuel limits, endurance limits, crew tolerance limits. The entire U-boat campaign is shaped by the question of how long a submarine can remain operational before mechanical failure, hunger, or fatigue forces a home. Scarcity is not an anomaly. It is the operating environment. So when intelligence suggests that the American Navy has surpassed these limits so completely that it can institutionalize indulgence, the implication is impossible to ignore. This is not a matter of taste. It is a matter of capacity. German analysts understand what ice cream represents in logistical terms. It requires milk powder or fresh dairy inputs, sugar, stabilizers, reliable electricity, refrigeration machinery, skilled technicians, and secure distribution networks. Each component implies redundancy. Each redundancy implies surplus. And surplus implies an industrial system operating far beyond immediate necessity. In total war, that surplus becomes strategic. The cultural shock is profound. Within the German naval tradition, austerity is inseparable from professionalism. Sailors endure because endurance is expected. Comfort is considered corrosive, even dangerous. Discipline replaces indulgence. This worldview, forged in scarcity, cannot easily accommodate an enemy that weaponizes abundance. And yet, that is precisely what the Americans are doing. The psychological impact extends beyond intelligence offices. Word spreads through prisoners of war, neutral sailors, and intercepted correspondence. American sailors speak casually of ice cream at anchor, of fresh food in forward areas, of repair ships that feel like floating cities. These accounts clash violently with Axis experience. By 1944, German crews face shrinking rations. Patrols shorten not by choice, but by necessity. Mechanical failures increase as maintenance becomes rushed and under-resourced. Morale erodes slowly, unevenly, but relentlessly. Against this backdrop, the American ice cream ship becomes a symbol, not of luxury, but of inevitability. It signals that the enemy is not racing against exhaustion. It is pacing itself. It suggests a war being fought on a schedule of years, not months. And in such a war, attritional strategies falter. The realization does not change German policy overnight. It cannot. By this stage, options are limited. But it alters perception. The war at sea is no longer viewed as a contest that might be tipped by singular breakthroughs or technological miracles. It is seen as a structural imbalance. Leadership on both sides understands this, even if they express it differently. American commanders do not boast about ice cream ships. They rarely mention them publicly. Their significance lies not in propaganda, but in function. German commanders, facing mounting losses and diminishing returns, grasp the implication quietly. A navy that feeds its sailors well, rests them, repairs them, and rewards endurance will outlast one that relies solely on sacrifice. This is not sentiment. It is arithmetic. By late 1944, as Allied fleets push toward the Philippines and beyond, the war's trajectory becomes irreversible. Not because of any single battle, but because one side has achieved logistical permanence. The ice cream ships continue to operate, unnoticed by history books for decades. They do not fire shots. They do not earn battle stars for combat. Yet they serve through the war's most intense phases, quietly reinforcing the human machinery of victory. In total war, symbols matter. And sometimes, the most powerful symbol is not a weapon, but a reminder that one side can afford to think beyond survival. As the Pacific War grinds onward, this realization settles into certainty. The Axis powers are no longer fighting an opponent who might tire. They are facing one who can sustain the war indefinitely. From this point forward, the question is no longer how the war might turn, but how soon it will end. As the war moves into its final phases, the presence of ice cream ships no longer feels novel within the American fleet. They have become part of the environment, another quiet component of a system designed to keep men operational for as long as required. By late 1944 and in 1945, U.S. naval operations reach a scale unmatched in history. The Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each campaign demands sustained naval pressure over weeks and months. Ships rotate through action, repair, and resupply with mechanical precision. Crews are exhausted, but they are not collapsing. This distinction matters. Medical officers note lower rates of fatigue-related breakdowns compared to earlier phases of the war. Commanders report steadier discipline during prolonged deployments. While ice cream alone does not produce these outcomes, it exists within a broader ecosystem of morale management that now includes regular mail delivery, improved rest cycles, fresh food whenever possible, and predictable resupply schedules. The psychological environment aboard American ships stabilizes. Sailors understand the rhythm of war. They know when relief will come, not just in the form of leave or victory, but in smaller, tangible ways. The certainty that the system will provide, even modestly, reduces anxiety. It reinforces trust in leadership. That trust translates into performance under pressure. In contrast, Axis naval forces experience the opposite trajectory. German U-boat operations dwindle as fuel shortages, air patrols, and technological inferiority converge. Patrol durations shorten. Crews return demoralized, aware that each mission carries diminishing strategic value. The material gap between navies becomes impossible to bridge. Within post-war analyses, German officers reflect on this imbalance. They speak not only of lost battles, but of lost momentum, of fighting an enemy whose strength seemed to regenerate endlessly while their own resources evaporated. The ice cream ships rarely appear in these reflections by name, but the concept they represent, logistical excess, appears repeatedly. By the war's end, American naval doctrine has absorbed the lesson fully. Morale is no longer treated as an abstract quality. It is planned, resourced, and protected. Support vessels are recognized as force multipliers. Comfort, within limits, is acknowledged as compatible with discipline. The ice cream barges themselves begin to disappear quietly. Some are decommissioned. Others are repurposed. Their wartime role ends without ceremony. No medals are awarded for frozen desserts. Yet their impact lingers. They have demonstrated that modern warfare is not only about destroying the enemy's capacity to fight, but about preserving one's own capacity to endure. They have shown that industrial power can express itself in unexpected ways, and that those expressions carry strategic weight. As the guns fall silent and fleets begin the long process of demobilization, historians and planners look back on the war's logistics with new clarity. The battles are remembered. The admirals are studied. The ships are cataloged. But beneath all of it lies a quieter truth. The war was won not only by those who fired the weapons, but by those who ensured that, even in the harshest conditions, the human beings operating those weapons could recover, reset, and continue. And that understanding will shape naval planning long after the last ice cream is served. When the Second World War ends, the machinery that sustained it does not vanish overnight. Ships return to port. Crews disperse. Supply depots empty slowly, deliberately, as the largest demobilization in history unfolds. Among the countless auxiliary vessels that fade from service are the ice cream ships and barges, oddities to outsiders, but familiar to those who relied on them. In peacetime, their existence might seem excessive. In retrospect, it appears inevitable. Post-war naval analysis in the United States places unprecedented emphasis on logistics. Reports compiled by the Navy Department and later incorporated into Cold War doctrine highlight a simple conclusion. Sustained global operations require more than weapons and fuel. They require systems that preserve human effectiveness over time. This lesson reshapes planning. Future fleets are designed with integrated support concepts. Cold storage becomes standard. Morale services are formalized. Supply ships expand their roles beyond basic sustenance. The idea that sailors must simply endure deprivation loses institutional dominance. The contrast with defeated Axis navies is instructive. German post-war memoirs and interrogations reveal a deep awareness of material disparity. Former officers describe the war at sea as one fought under permanent constraint. They recognize that even tactical successes could not compensate for industrial and logistical inferiority. The psychological weight of this realization, felt during the war but articulated afterward, underscores how abundance shapes not just outcomes, but perceptions. Ice cream, in this context, becomes a symbol frequently referenced by historians, not because it is unique, but because it is illustrative. It condenses a complex system into a single, graspable image, a fleet that can sustain indulgence while advancing across an ocean. In the decades that follow, military logisticians return to this example repeatedly, not to advocate luxury, but to emphasize resilience. Modern navies invest in crew welfare not out of sentiment, but because the Second World War proved that morale and endurance are inseparable from operational success. The ice cream ships themselves leave little physical trace. Few photographs survive. Fewer records capture their daily routines. They were never meant to be remembered. They existed to function. Yet their legacy persists in doctrine, in design, and in philosophy. When modern naval task forces deploy for months at a time, supported by mobile supply chains capable of delivering fresh food, medical care, and rest opportunities, they follow a path laid quietly in the Pacific during 1943 and 1944. The war demonstrated that victory belongs not only to those who can strike hardest, but to those who can remain present longest. As historians examined the machinery of American victory, they increasingly look beyond battles and into systems, into planning offices, into supply manifests, into the unnoticed infrastructure that allowed combat power to regenerate again and again. And there, among fuel lines and repair docks, sits the memory of frozen desserts served in tropical heat. A small detail, a vast implication, because in total war, the side that can afford to think about tomorrow, about morale, about endurance, about the human cost of time, is often the side that wins. That understanding sets the stage for a final reflection, one that looks beyond ice cream ships and toward what they truly represented. In the long record of the Second World War, history tends to remember the visible forces of change, battles, leaders, weapons that altered the balance of power. Yet beneath these defining moments lies a quieter truth. Wars are not only won by what is destroyed, but by what is sustained. The American ice cream ships never appeared in headlines. They were not photographed in victory parades. Their crews did not stand on bridges during surrender ceremonies. And yet, they served at the heart of a system that understood something essential about modern warfare. Endurance is a human condition before it is a military one. For the sailors who stood on sun-scorched decks and tasted something cold in the middle of a relentless war, ice cream was not a novelty. It was reassurance, proof that the world beyond the horizon still existed, proof that someone, somewhere, had planned for their exhaustion. For the enemy watching from afar, the idea was unsettling for a different reason. It suggested a war being fought without desperation, a conflict in which resources were not merely consumed, but managed with confidence. A navy that could afford to think beyond survival, could afford to wait, to adapt, and ultimately to prevail. This is what the German Navy could not believe. Not the ice cream itself, but what it implied. It implied an industrial civilization operating at full capacity. A logistical philosophy that treated morale as infrastructure. A belief that victory required not just bravery, but care for the people asked to endure the longest. In the end, the ice cream ships remind us that history is shaped as much by planning tables as by battlefields. That technology does not only manifest in weapons, but in systems designed to preserve the human spirit under pressure. They stand as an unlikely symbol of how the United States fought the war at sea, not with indulgence for its own sake, but with a deep understanding that wars of distance and duration are decided by those who can sustain life, purpose, and resolve. And sometimes, in the midst of steel and fire, that understanding arrives quietly, served cold, in a metal bowl beneath a tropical sun.